There are wounds the world can't see, only the soul remembers them. Tonight's story is not about blame or revenge. It's about the woman who learned that even the deepest betrayal can lead to gentleness again. You're listening to Calm Mind Journal. This is the scar of love. There are silences that do not belong to loneliness. They belong to routine, to a love that has forgotten its own name. In Austin, Texas, the night radio hums softly through empty apartments. Between the static and the slow jazz, a woman's voice carries warmth she no longer feels. Her name is Emma Brooks, 30 years old, a late-night host whose voice has soothed strangers for years. People call in to tell their stories, lost loves, sleepless regrets, old promises. She listens, comforts, and offers the kind of advice that sounds like healing. But when the on-air light fades, she is just a woman whispering into an empty room. Her husband, Lucas Carter, is a soldier stationed at Fort Bliss, several hours away in El Paso. They have been married for 2 years, measured more in distance than in days. He comes home once every few months, each time a little quieter, as if the miles between them have found a way to live inside him. The walls of their apartment are lined with photographs that have not been updated. There she is, smiling at the wedding reception, holding his arm, his eyes soft and full of promise. She doesn't look at those photos anymore. When she dusts the frames, she moves quickly, as if pausing would let the silence inside them speak. Every evening before her shift, she boils water for tea, sets one cup on the counter, and stops herself before pouring a second. Then, out of habit, she glances at her phone. No new messages, just the same wallpaper, a picture of Lucas in uniform, smiling at a camera that must have loved him more than he could love anyone back. Sometimes, between calls on the radio, she speaks to herself not on air, just quietly, as if testing whether her voice still belongs to her. People say love dies when it's betrayed, but sometimes it just fades because no one's there to feed it anymore. Outside, the city stretches into a sleepless glow. Coffee shops closing, taxis crossing the bridge, a siren in the distance. Emma writes show notes in a worn leather journal, each page beginning with a listener's name and ending with a sentence she'll never read aloud. You can love someone so deeply that you forget to leave room for yourself. When the shift ends, she walks home under flickering streetlights. She used to text Lucas, "Just finished. Miss you." Now she doesn't bother. His replies arrive like postcards from a stranger. Short, polite, And 2 days late, one night, she receives a letter at the station. The handwriting is unfamiliar, clean, deliberate. Inside, your voice helps me sleep. I wonder what keeps you awake. She folds it back carefully, not out of fear, but because it sounds like something she once would have written. In the quiet of her apartment, she sits by the window, watching lights fade one by one in the buildings opposite. There's comfort in realizing that everyone, somewhere, is pretending to be fine. She thinks of Lucas, how he never said "I love you" before hanging up, how his voice on the phone always sounded like duty, not affection. Maybe love is like radio waves, traveling far, breaking up in static, and only sometimes, if the night is quiet enough, coming through clearly. Tonight, she writes one more line in her journal. I used to believe distance was the test of love. Now I think it's how love learns to disappear. The first lie in every marriage is that love alone is enough. When Lucas returns home on leave, he brings the same suitcase, the same faint cologne, and a silence that now feels rehearsed. He kisses her cheek, not her mouth, and says, "You look tired." She laughs softly, the kind of laugh people use to hide the bruise under a smile. That evening, she makes his favorite dinner: grilled salmon, jasmine rice, and the small bowl of pickled radish he once said reminded him of home. They eat in the soft hum of the refrigerator, their conversation practical, polite, painfully brief. How's work, he asks. Good, she says. Long nights, the usual. He nods, his eyes somewhere else. She studies the space between them, the way his hands stay folded, the way his phone never leaves the table. Do you ever get lonely out there? She asks gently. He smiles without looking up. We're always busy. It's not an answer. It's a dismissal dressed as reassurance. Later, when he showers, she hears the water running longer than it needs to. He hums a tune she doesn't recognize. When he emerges, towel around his shoulders, she catches the scent again, sharp, floral, not hers. That night, they lie in bed facing opposite walls. Between them, a canyon made of good intentions and unspoken truths. She counts his breaths until she falls asleep, pretending they are synchronized. In the morning, he leaves early for a meeting. She finds his coffee cup still half full. The lipstick stain on the rim isn't hers. At the studio that evening, Emma's voice carries calm even as her chest tightens. She reads a caller's letter. My husband and I barely talk. How do you love someone who isn't really there? She breathes in, exhales, and answers. Sometimes we stay because we're waiting for a version of them that doesn't exist anymore. Her producer, Maya, glances up through the glass booth, eyes soft with concern. "You okay?" she mouths. Emma nods. The lie rolls off her lips, smoother each night. When the broadcast ends, she drives home slowly. The kind of drive where red lights feel like mercy. In her apartment, the air feels colder than usual. Lucas's duffel bag is still by the door, unzipped, half packed, as if he had left room for uncertainty. She scrolls through her phone, searching for any sign of connection texts, missed calls, something. Instead, she sees a notification she's never seen before, a tagged photo from an unfamiliar account. Curiosity is just pain wearing perfume. She clicks. The photo shows a group of soldiers at a base event. Lucas stands near the center, smiling. Next to him, a young man, shorter, slender, hand resting casually on his shoulder. The caption reads, "Grateful for brothers who make the world feel less heavy. Hat Carter. Always family." Emma zooms in. The man's name tag reads Daniel Ross. Something inside her goes very, very still. For 3 days, she says nothing. Not to Lucas, not to Maya, not even to herself. But silence can only hold so much truth before it starts to leak. One night, she opens Lucas's laptop. The password is his mother's birthday. Inside, she finds emails long, intimate, careful, not explicit, just emotional, the kind of tenderness that used to belong to her. "You make it easier to breathe here. Can't wait for the next trip. Don't overthink it. Just feel." Every line is a wound disguised as poetry. She closes the laptop slowly, like someone putting a lid on fire. Then she sits for a long time, hands trembling, breathing through the dizziness that follows truth. There is no handbook for discovering the person you love has built a second life you never got invited to. In the mirror, her reflection looks unfamiliar, not broken, just changed. She ties her hair up, washes her face, and whispers, "You will not disappear because someone else forgot how to see you." At 2 a.m., she begins writing her resignation letter. She tells herself it's for rest, but deep down, she knows she's planning an escape from the station, from the city, from the version of herself that waited too long. When dawn arrives, she sits by the window again. The tea has gone cold. The second cup is still empty. She looks out over the skyline, the slow unfolding of morning light that makes even broken things appear tender. I used to think love was what kept two people together. She writes in her journal. Now I think it's what keeps you standing, even when the other person walks away. And as the city wakes, she finally admits to herself the marriage is still alive, but the love inside it has died quietly, without witnesses and without a sound.
Não, sarei quase que si, acho que si, e estilos que gosto, que isso, que assim,
Absence doesn't always enter with a knock. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing the face of routine. It had been 4 months since Lucas's last visit. Austin was heavy with late summer heat, the kind that makes even breathing feel like an effort. Emma had learned to measure time not by days, but by silences the length of his unanswered messages, the pauses in their calls, the empty chair across from her at breakfast. He said his schedule was unpredictable, that the base was demanding, that they were short on men. Every reason made sense. That was the problem every lie does until it's complete. Her mother, Grace, called often to check in, offering advice in the gentle way of women who have already survived their heartbreaks. Men in uniform, Grace would sigh. They always come home with more ghosts than medals. Emma would smile into the receiver. I'm fine, Mom. It wasn't true, but it wasn't false either. Fine is just pain with manners. When Lucas finally came home, it was unannounced. She heard the door open at dusk, and for one foolish second, her heart jumped like it used to. He stood there, same uniform, same careful smile, but his presence felt borrowed, temporary, like he was visiting a memory. Surprise, he said softly. She laughed, because that's what wives do when they don't know what else to do. He set his duffel down and reached to hug her. The embrace was brief, polite enough to pass for affection, cold enough to confirm everything she feared. That night, she cooked because cooking was safer than talking. He scrolled through his phone while she seasoned the soup. When she glanced over, his face was lit not by love, but by the glow of someone else's attention. "Who's that?" she asked lightly. He looked up, caught, and smiled. "Just one of the guys. We're planning next week's schedule." It wasn't a lie big enough to confront. It was small enough to swallow. But small lies, taken daily, have a way of starving trust. Later that evening, she found him on the balcony, leaning on the rail, cigarette between his fingers. Lucas didn't smoke, at least not before. She stepped outside, the city wind brushing her bare arms. You started again? He shrugged. Only when it's quiet. I thought you hated it. He smiled faintly. I hate a lot of things I still do. She wanted to ask what he meant. Instead, she said, You look tired. He replied, You always say that. And just like that, conversation folded in on itself, two people fluent in avoidance. Inside, the TV murmured, a romantic drama, two strangers finding each other after loss. Emma muted it halfway through. The story felt too honest. When he left again 3 days later, he didn't ask her to drive him to the airport. He said it was easier that way. She agreed, because ease was the last thing they had left. He hugged her goodbye like a soldier saluting a flag with duty, not tenderness. After he left, she walked back into the apartment and sat on the edge of their unmade bed. His cologne lingered faintly on the pillow. She pressed her face against it until it stopped smelling like him and started smelling like memory. Weeks passed. Work filled the empty hours. But even her listeners began to notice the change in her tone. You sound different tonight, one caller said. Are you all right? She smiled into the mic. Sometimes voices change when the heart is learning new shapes. The caller laughed softly, unaware of the confession hidden inside. That night, her producer, Maya, watched her from behind the booth glass. You sure you don't want to take a break? Emma shook her head. If I stop talking, I might start thinking. On Sunday, she scrolled through Lucas's tagged photos, something she'd never done before, as if superstition had kept her from looking too closely. Now, curiosity overruled fear. There it was again, the name, Daniel Ross. A new post. 2 men sitting by a campfire, Lucas leaning in, laughing, eyes bright in a way they hadn't been for her in months. The caption, Some bonds don't need explaining. She stared at it until her vision blurred. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger needs clarity, and all she had was fog. The next morning, she opened a blank browser tab, typed Daniel Ross into the search bar, and pressed enter. There he was. Public profile, a musician, 24, living in El Paso. Photos of guitars, sunlight, handwritten lyrics. In one post, he'd written, I love people who are brave enough to live honestly. The irony made her laugh quietly, bitterly, the kind of laugh that feels like coughing up glass. She scrolled further, and her stomach clenched when she found it a photo of 2 mugs on a small kitchen table captioned, Morning after the storm. The reflection in the window behind them showed a silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably Lucas. Emma closed the laptop and pressed her palms to her eyes. She sat like that for a long time, until her breathing steadied into something that sounded like decision. That night, during her radio shift, she told a story that wasn't a story. A woman on the air, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. Sometimes, what hurts most isn't the betrayal itself. It's realizing you weren't even the secret worth protecting. Maya stared through the booth window, realizing this wasn't a caller. Emma kept speaking anyway. People say love is about understanding, but maybe it's about recognition, seeing, and being seen. And when someone stops seeing you, you start disappearing from your own reflection. She turned off the mic. Silence flooded the studio. Her chest felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had somewhere to live. At dawn, she made a decision. She took her car keys, packed a small bag, a single change of clothes, a toothbrush, her journal, no makeup, no jewelry, no second thoughts. The drive to Fort Bliss was 5 hours. The sun rose behind her, painting the highway in streaks of gold and blue. She didn't cry. There are tears for grief, and then there are tears that belong to clarity. This was neither. This was resolve, dressed in exhaustion. She played no music. The hum of the tires was enough. At a gas station outside San Angelo, she looked at her reflection in the restroom mirror. Eyes swollen. Yes, but alive, more alive than she had been in months. She whispered to her reflection, "You're not going there to ask. You're going there to know." Then she drove on. The road narrowed into desert, and the air shimmered with heat. Somewhere beyond the horizon was truth, and even if it broke her, she was finally ready to meet it head on. When she reached the base town, she parked outside a small motel, checked in under a fake name not out of fear, but out of dignity. Sometimes you hide not because you're guilty, but because you want to fall apart in private. She lay on the motel bed, the fan spinning above her, listening to the silence that used to terrify her, but now felt like company. In her notebook, she wrote one last line before sleeping. There's a kind of peace in knowing the storm is near. You stop waiting, you start breathing. By morning, the desert had traded its moonlight for heat. Emma woke in the motel to an air that smelled faintly of bleach and last night's decisions. The ceiling fan drew slow circles like a clock, too tired to keep time. She lay still for a minute, letting her heartbeat settle into a rhythm that wasn't panic, Then she sat up, wrote the date at the top of her notebook, and beneath it, a sentence she didn't yet know how to carry. I am not here to rescue anything. I am here to greet the truth. She showered, tied her hair back, and dressed in the simplest clothes she owned. Dark jeans, a white shirt, a lightweight jacket. If a moment could have a uniform, this felt like one undecorated, ready. Outside, the sun was already sharp enough to carve shadows into stone. She drove the last 6 minutes in silence, passing a diner, a pawn shop, a church whose marquee read, "God isn't late, he's patient." She wasn't in the mood for theology. She wanted facts. Lucas's rental sat 2 streets from the gate. A single-story stucco with a tired mesquite tree out front, and a porch that looked like it had given up on conversation. His truck was there, parked beside it, a blue sedan she recognized from a photo. Emma pulled to the curb and let the engine tick itself into quiet. She could feel her pulse in her wrists, her throat, the small bones of her ears. She thought of the 100 ways this could go and chose none of them. She would let the moment choose for her. At the door, she knocked twice. Not a demand, a declaration. I am here. Bootsteps. The deadbolt slid, and then there he was. Lucas, hair damp, t-shirt soft from too many washings. Surprise moving through his face in 3 acts. Recognition, calculation, fear, Emma. His voice landed in the doorway and did not cross it. Why didn't you call? I did, she said. You stopped answering. They stood there for the length of a breath neither of them wanted to hold. Finally, he stepped back. Come in. The house was tidy in the way of men who clean right before guests arrive. The living room held 2 coffee mugs on the table, 2 pairs of shoes under the couch, a blanket with an extra fold as if it had recently been unfolded and then lied about. The air carried a citrus cologne that wasn't his. She knew because she had bought most of his life, and none of this was in it. Coffee, he offered. No, she didn't sit. Is he here? Lucas blinked, the first flinch of an unpracticed liar. Who? Daniel, she said, and watched his shoulders drop. The way people unburden themselves when the thing they were holding up has finally been named. From the kitchen, a cabinet door closed quietly. A beat later, a figure stepped into view, mid-20s, slender, eyes too open for this much pain. Daniel stopped when he saw her. Not with guilt, but with something gentler, something like sorrow. For a moment they regarded each other as if they had met in a dream that had finally remembered itself. Hi, he said, because there are no available scripts for this meeting. I'm I know who you are, Emma answered, but without edge. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. And I think you know who I am. He nodded. I do. Lucas tried again. Emma, this isn't. Don't edit it, she said. And the words came out calm enough to hold the room. If we are going to end something today, let it be the revisions. Silence arrived like an honest friend. In it, small facts began to glow: the second toothbrush on the bathroom counter, the sweater draped over a chair that was too narrow in the shoulders to be Lucas's, a guitar leaning against the wall with a set list taped to its side. Emma turned to Lucas. How long? He swallowed. His hands, empty, looked like they wanted to be holding anything else. 3 years, he said, before we were married. It had started before I knew how to stop it. The arithmetic hurt more than the confession. She had walked down the aisle into a story that had already chosen its direction. She took a breath and laid the next question on the table like a scalpel. Was I ever real to you? Lucas's eyes softened the way eyes do when they encounter a place in themselves they've avoided. Yes, he said too quickly, then slower, truer. Yes, but not in the way you deserved. The word sat between them and took a chair. Daniel spoke, his voice careful. I didn't mean to. Emma held up a hand. I don't need your apology, she said, and realized it was true. I need recognition. From him, she nodded at Lucas. From myself. Lucas tried to bridge the distance with explanation. Explanations, she thought, are apologies that refuse to kneel. I was afraid, he said, of my family, of the base, of losing everything I thought I was supposed to be. And me, she asked. What was I supposed to be? His answer was a wince. Cover, he said, almost too quiet to hear. Companionship, safety, not a target. She felt the room tilt. The truth did not stab. It sanded. You turned my life into camouflage, she said. The sentence steady as a metronome. You called it a marriage. From the window, the noon sun made an altar on the floor. None of them stepped into it. Daniel shifted his weight. Emma. He paused, searching for a word that would not wound. I loved a version of him that hated himself less around me. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. She looked at him, truly looked the young face, the musician's hands, the way shame and tenderness kept trading places in his eyes. He was not the villain her pain wanted. He was simply a person whose existence had been used like a weapon he hadn't meant to carry. This isn't on you alone, she said softly, and watched relief flicker across a face too used to blame. Then she turned to Lucas again. But it is on you. You asked me to build a life on a floor you knew was a trapdoor. Lucas pressed his palms to his eyes, breath stuttering. I never wanted to hurt you. That's not a virtue, she said. It's a wish. Hurt doesn't check your intentions. For a long minute, no one spoke. Outside, a pickup rumbled past. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked at a mail carrier who was only trying to complete his route. The ordinary world was working, delightfully indifferent to the private endings it bordered. Emma broke the silence. I won't negotiate with history, she said. I won't play the judge or the ghost. I came for clarity. I have it. Please, Lucas said. The pleas of a man ising time to slow, not a person to stay. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth, she said, to yourself, your mother, your commanding officer if you must, but mostly to the mirror. Stop using people as bridges to places you are too afraid to walk to alone. He nodded, a small, collapsed gesture. And you, I'm going to leave, she answered. And then I'm going to learn to live as if my life isn't an alibi. She turned toward the door, and then because the soul, even shattered, insists on kindness, she faced Daniel. Be careful with him, she said, not because he's fragile, because he's powerful in the ways that break people quietly. Daniel's yes was not a word, but a lowering of the eyes. At the threshold, Lucas reached for the only remaining script. Emma, wait. She didn't. She stopped. But she didn't wait. There is a difference. She faced him one last time and gave him the parting gift she had come to deliver: accuracy. You didn't choose him over me, she said. You chose honesty over pretending, and then you asked me to be the pretend. I refuse. She stepped into the white heat of noon, and the door clicked behind her with the gentlest finality she had ever heard. No slam, no shouted lines, no thrown objects turning love into debris, just closure, soft as a fingertip pressed against a pulse to count what remains. On the curb, the neighborhood wavered in the desert brightness. She walked to her car, each step a sentence. When she put both hands on the steering wheel, her fingers trembled, not with panic, but with aftershock. The way a building hums for a moment after the train has passed. She did not drive. Not yet. She let the moment widen, then reached for her phone and opened a new note. The words came slow but obedient. Today, I did not lose a husband. I lost a lie and gained a mirror. She looked up and caught, in the windshield's faint reflection, her own face tired. Yes, but recognizably hers. She touched the glass with 2 fingers, as if blessing a version of herself who had been waiting to be retrieved. Across the street, the blue sedan's door opened. Daniel stepped out, hesitated, then approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He didn't knock on the window. He waited until she looked at him. "May I say one thing?" he asked. Emma lowered the window halfway. "One, I'm sorry for my part in your pain," he said simply. "Even if we both know that the architecture wasn't mine, you deserved a story that didn't ask you to vanish." She studied him, the clean lines of a face that would one day be older and, if he was lucky, kinder to itself. "So did you," she said. "Make sure you get it." He nodded, stepped back, and returned to the house where a man was learning. Too late. How expensive cowardice can be. Emma exhaled, started the engine, and let the air conditioner flood the car with manufactured winter. She pulled away from the curb and allowed the neighborhood to reduce itself to rear view. Facts: a small stucco house, a mesquite tree, 2 parked vehicles, a chapter that had accepted the period she offered. At the first red light, she felt suddenly violently aware of her body, of the tendons in her wrists, the muscles in her jaw, the ache under her breastbone where love had lived and then turned feral. She pressed a palm there as if to calm a dog. The light changed. She drove toward the motel, not because she needed a place to hide, but because she needed a room that would not ask who she was to anyone else. In the parking lot, a dust devil cartwheeled across the asphalt and then disappeared as if embarrassed. She smiled at the absurd grace of it. Inside her room, she set her keys on the dresser, sat on the bed, and let herself feel everything she had postponed: outrage that arrived as heat behind the eyes, grief that came as a heaviness across the shoulders, relief that floated strangely above both. A small lantern in a windless room. When the tide of feeling receded enough to stand, she drew the curtains and turned off the overhead light. Soft shade gathered around the furniture. She made tea from the powder packets by the sink. It tasted like comfort that had been photocopied too many times. She drank it anyway. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number. She knew it would be Lucas before she read it. "I'm sorry." She stared at the 2 words until they lost shape. Then she typed back 4 that did not. "Be honest." Start there. She blocked his number, not as revenge, but as discipline. Freedom requires boundaries. Otherwise, it is just a prettier cage. By late afternoon, the motel's rhythm had found her footsteps in the hall. A laugh from a room 2 doors down. A television murmuring the sports channel to someone's loneliness. She lay down and allowed her body the mercy of sleep. When she woke, the sky beyond the curtains had changed color, trade winding itself from glare to rose. She stood, stretched, and felt the smallest lift under her ribs, as if her bones had agreed to carry her again. She opened her notebook and wrote without stopping for 5 full minutes, the pen leaving a dark path across the paper. I believed betrayal would define me. Today, I suspect recognition might. I was not unlovable. I was misused. I am not leaving a man. I am leaving a role. Tomorrow, I will drive east. The sun, for once, will be in front of me. She closed the notebook and pressed her palm against it, a seal that needed no wax. Then she stepped into the bathroom and washed her face with water that ran clean and cold over skin that belonged, finally, only to her. That night, Austin would hear her voice again. She would sit in the glow of the red light and say nothing about soldiers or lies or motel rooms. She would talk about the kinds of endings that do not burn but close, the doors that click gently and still change a life. She would tell her listeners that clarity is not cruelty, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a story is finish it. But that was later. For now, in a small room off a long road, Emma Brooks stood very still and listened to the quiet. It did not accuse her. It did not abandon her. It simply stayed, and in its staying, taught her something the world had forgotten to mention. Some truths don't save you from pain. They save you from wasting it. Paperwork is how the heart admits defeat without making a sound. 3 days after the motel, Emma drove back to Austin with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgery. The interstate unspooled beneath her like a long, tired confession. She didn't listen to music. She didn't rehearse speeches. She let the white lines pass and trusted the road to change her mind's subject. It didn't. The subject stayed. At home, the apartment had the aftertaste of absence. She opened windows, changed the sheets, pulled his jacket from the back of a chair, and folded it into the hall closet, an interim grave for stories she was not yet ready to bury. Then she filled a glass with water, drank all of it, and took out a single folder marriage license, bank statements, the title to a car that had carried too many promises too far. She drafted the first email to a family attorney a colleague had once recommended, with the kind of casual seriousness people reserve for wills and wedding vows. The subject line was one word: dissolution. She paused there, fingers hovering. Then she wrote the rest dates, addresses, a brief account that refused melodrama. My husband has been in a long-term relationship outside of our marriage that predates our wedding. I would like to proceed with an uncontested divorce. The lawyer replied inside an hour. Professional empathy wrapped in bullet points. There would be forms. There would be filings. There would be a waiting period to make sure everyone was sure about what they already knew. Paper commits faster than people. By evening, she sat under the radio booth's dim light, the familiar red glow announcing on air. Her notes were clean, her voice steady. She read a letter from a listener who had discovered a lover's secret double life. How do I protect myself without becoming bitter? The woman asked. Emma breathed, because breathing was the only honest preface to truth. You don't protect yourself from pain, she said softly into the mic. You protect yourself from waste. Feel everything, but spend nothing you'll need later to rebuild. Maya's eyes glistened behind the glass. A silent amen. The song she cued next warm piano in minor landed like a blanket pulled up to a shaking chin. When the show ended, they walked the empty corridor to the parking lot in the hush that follows good exhaustion. Maya opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. You don't have to say anything, she said, but I need you to know I'm here, and I'm not leaving if you get quiet. Thank you, Emma answered, the words skating thin and sincere over the ache beneath. I won't be eloquent for a while. Eloquence is overrated, Maya said, and the joke lifted a corner of the night. The next day, the doorbell rang at 3 p.m., the hour when light is honest and strangers are not. On the mat stood Margaret Carter, a woman who wore disappointment like a brooch, former nurse, current guardian of appearances. She stepped inside without waiting for invitation, the way mothers-in-law have been entering living rooms since architecture invented doors. I brought lemon bars, she said, placing a tin on the counter as if sugar could convert history. They're your favorite. They were not. Emma folded her hands. Coffee? No, Margaret said, already pouring herself water. I won't be long. They sat at the table like reluctant chess partners, each piece already moved in memory. Margaret began with a sigh that assumed sympathy. I know about your visit, she said, lowering her eyes as if to suggest that decency had asked not to be implicated. Fort Bliss, the boy. Daniel, Emma said. He has a name. Margaret flinched in a way that suggested offense rather than pain. I never raised my son to. She didn't finish the sentence. Prejudice often runs out of grammar before it runs out of confidence. You raised a son who is afraid, Emma said, keeping her voice low enough to fit the room. Fear makes cowards and liars of people who might otherwise be good. Coward Margaret's mouth tightened. He's trying to hold on to his career, his standing, things men have to protect. And women, Emma asked, what must we protect home? Margaret said immediately, family, the chance to try again. She reached for a napkin and smoothed it, though it didn't need smoothing. We're all a little broken, she said with rehearsed compassion. You could forgive him. It would make things easier for who Emma asked, then softened because the older woman's eyes had earned softness from someone long before this conversation. Margaret, I'm not leaving to punish him. I'm leaving to stop punishing myself. Margaret looked at the lemon bars like they might volunteer to change the subject. You know the base. They talk. People talk. The pronoun they stood in for a stadium full of unnamed judges. If this becomes known, if he confesses, confession is not a virus. Emma said, it won't kill him. The pretending is what's doing it. He isn't that kind of man. Margaret whispered, meaning a kind that has always existed but has never been granted safety in rooms like this. No, Emma said quietly. He's a man who made me his closet. The sentence hung in the air, a truth so precisely shaped it cut without needing force. Margaret took it, absorbed it, and folded it into the part of herself that kept inconvenient facts in neat stacks. So that's it, she asked at last. You're done. I'm awake, Emma said, and for once the word did not feel like a bruise. Margaret stood, straightened her jacket, and left the water half drunk on the table. At the door, she turned with the residual kindness of a woman who had loved in the only way she had been taught. You were good for him, she said. It was meant as consolation. It landed as epitaph. When the door closed, the apartment exhaled. Emma washed the glass, wiped the table, and threw away the lemon bars. Mercy sometimes looks exact. The days arranged themselves into a new choreography. Mornings run along the river until breath crowded out thought. Afternoons emails with the attorney. Signatures. A list of household items divided cleanly in a spreadsheet that made domestic life look like a small business being responsibly dissolved. Evenings, the show. A slow hour where her voice carried a steadiness her feet were still learning. She moved through rooms with intention, placing a plant where his trophies had been, sliding the couch 2 feet left, buying a small rug in a yellow that could not be mistaken for grief. She was building a home on the same square footage, only the proportions were changing. She set aside 1 box, things to release, inside wedding favors, a tie clip too heavy for the sentiment it held, photos in frames she would keep but refill. She did not set them on fire. The dramatic gesture has its satisfactions, but ash is another kind of keeping. On a Wednesday, the attorney sent documents labeled Final Petition. She printed them, signed them with a pen that had written better sentences, and felt the particular tremor of irreversible decisions. There is a ceremony to genuine endings. This was hers. She whispered a line into the quiet I loved. It wasn't returned honestly. I end this with respect for the past, for the lessons, for myself. Then she sealed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox like a child walking a note to a teacher she didn't want to disappoint. On Friday, Lucas texted from a new number I'll sign. I'm sorry. She typed a reply and deleted it. Then she wrote what she meant. Be honest with everyone, especially yourself. She pressed send, blocked the new number, and put her phone face down without the old panic. The first night she slept dreamless. She woke with the disorienting lightness of someone who has been carrying a pack so long her shoulders forget the alternative. She made oatmeal, added blueberries because goodness should be visible, and ate at the window where morning practiced its brightness. The ordinary is a sacrament if you watch closely enough. People noticed. The barista at the corner shop said, "You seem different," Maya said. You paused after a caller's story last night, and it felt like a benediction. Grace, her mother, said nothing at first, then mailed a package, 2 dish towels, a recipe card for tomato soup, and a note that read, "There are no medals for staying. Call me when you want company." Emma called. They spoke of books, then plants, then the weather, a gentle spiral toward the center where hurt lives. When Grace finally asked, "How are you in the way mothers mean it?" Emma answered in the one way daughters heal. "Sad," she said, and steady. Grace's breath came through the line like a hand. That's a good combination for building in the studio. The stories she read began to shift. She used to choose letters where hope was a cheap trick. Now she chose letters where hope had a job. People wrote to her about panic attacks in grocery aisles, about starting over at 57, about sons coming out and fathers coming around, so slowly it looked like a tide. One night, she closed the show with the sentence that arrived without plan and felt like it had been waiting. Forgiveness, she said into the mic, is not forgetting. It's remembering without purchasing the pain again. Maya sat very still as the song rose underneath, and when the track ended, she didn't speak. Some silences deserve to stand unaccompanied. When the court date arrived, an administrative morning in a room with stale air and decent chairs, Emma dressed simply, collected, and went alone. Lucas appeared at the other side of the aisle in a suit that didn't quite agree with his shoulders. He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor as if truth might be printed there. The judge reviewed documents, asked questions the law requires, and affixed a stamp that turned a decade of intertwined choices into an order that fit inside a manila file. On the steps outside, Lucas tried to find a sentence broad enough to contain both apology and relief. He failed. "I hope you're okay," he said. It was insufficient and, perhaps, the best he had. "I will be," she answered. "So will you, if you're brave." She turned away and felt the world resume its usual size. She did not cry on the bus home. Instead, she watched the city as if she had been assigned to write a paper about it. The man in the bright tie rehearsing a speech. The teenager smudging a heart on the window with a fingertip. The woman in scrubs sleeping between stops. Everyone surviving. Not heroically, just correctly. Back at the apartment, she opened her journal and wrote, "Today I said yes to reality and no to costume. Loss is not evidence I was wrong to love. It is evidence I am right to continue." She closed the book and felt the quiet, not as the absence of noise, but as the presence of room space in which to reassemble the person she had set aside to be someone's camouflage. The sun slanted across the rug in a geometry that pleased her. She lay down on it like a cat, stretched her arms overhead, and laughed small, startled, real. She had not expected laughter to return without fanfare. It had come through the side door, unannounced, exactly on time. That night on Whisper Lines, she told a story about a woman who learned to tell the truth to herself in the voice she used to comfort strangers. She didn't use names. She didn't need to. The listeners would fill themselves into the blanks the way people always do when they are ready. "I used to think the bravest thing was staying," she said, the booth's low light turning her features into something both recognizable and new. "Today, I think the bravest thing is to refuse a role that requires your disappearance." The phone lines lit up, not because scandal sells she had offered none, but because relief recognizes itself across distance. She took 2 calls, then another, and realized she wasn't tired. She was making room. When the hour ended, she sat in the dim, her hands loose on the script she had barely read. Maya nudged the door open and leaned in. "You sounded like home tonight," she said. Emma smiled. "Maybe I am." Outside, Austin breathed its summer breath, hot and forgiving. She stepped into it and felt the night step back, giving her space to pass. Somewhere, a train announced itself with a low, unhurried horn. Somewhere, a window lifted and a stranger turned off a lamp. Somewhere, a man rehearsed the truth he should have learned before he married. Somewhere, a young musician put down his guitar and decided to live his life without needing anyone to be his disguise. And here, on a sidewalk that had been witness to many smaller versions of her, Emma Brooks walked like a person whose weight had changed, not lighter, truer. The difference is subtle in speech and unmistakable in stride. Collapse had come, awakening had followed. The world, stubbornly ordinary, kept offering its small astonishments, the smell of night jasmine, a couple arguing softly and then laughing, a child pointing at the moon as if it were new. Emma looked up. The moon was the same. She was not. In one. Healing did not arrive as a revelation. It came disguised as errands. In the weeks after the court's rubber stamp, Emma learned the choreography of an ordinary life that no longer asked her to vanish. She ran in the mornings along the Colorado River until breath washed her thoughts clean. She answered listener emails at a small table by the window where the light behaved itself. She bought a basil plant and kept it alive, proof that attention, offered consistently, changes outcomes. On Tuesdays, she went to a tiny bakery that dusted everything with the same cheerful disregard. The owner, a woman with forearms like kindness, would set down a cinnamon roll and say nothing about grief. Silence, when offered with warmth, can be as medicinal as speech. She was not happy. She was something rarer, unwrecked. It was a Thursday when she saw him again, Ryan Mitchell, in the lobby of the public radio building, holding a paper cup like he was negotiating a truce with the caffeine. The last time he'd been on Whisper Lines, he'd spoken about mental health at work in sentences that found soft landings. Emma, he said, as if her name were a door he wasn't sure he had permission to open. I was hoping to run into you. I owe you an apology for vanishing when you needed steadiness. She tilted her head. People don't vanish, she said gently. They revert to capacity. What we call abandonment is often just an honesty we didn't request. He took that in without flinching. Then let me be honest now. I liked you before I met you. I liked the way your voice carries light without denying dark. I wasn't ready to risk liking a person who might need more than I could hold. And now, she asked, not coyly curiously, like a woman who'd retired from pretending. Now I'm willing not to be perfect, he said, if you're willing not to be either. The laugh left her like air rediscovering lungs. That's the best contract I've heard in a while. They began with decency. Coffee that did not require performance. Walks at dusk where talking and silence traded custody without conflict. He did not ask for her history like a collector. She offered what she could without handing over the deed. When she spoke of Lucas, she did not sharpen the letters. When she spoke of Daniel, she refused to weaponize his kindness against him. Ryan listened like a man who knew that listening has settings beyond fix and flee. One evening, under a sky that had the good manners to turn forgiving, Ryan said, "What would safety look like if you were allowed to define it?" She thought for a long time. Safety is where I can stop narrating my existence to justify it, she said, where I can be quiet without being suspected, where my no improves the room. Then let's build that, he said. And the sentence did not feel like a promise. It felt like work he already knew how to do. They cooked together in her small kitchen, which meant he chopped onions with the seriousness of surgery and she made fun of his devotion to symmetry. They learned the domestic math of tenderness. His coat found its own hook. Her shoes stopped apologizing under the chair. 2 toothbrushes stood in the cup like a thesis about sharing. Sometimes grief visited anyway, uninvited, but not unforgivable. She would go still in the middle of a song and need 2 minutes of quiet. He would pour water, not questions. She would say thank you without explanation. He would answer you're welcome without a receipt. On the radio, listeners noticed a change that did not announce itself with glitter. You sound anchored. One wrote, Emma smiled at the email the way a person smiles at a distant lighthouse, thankful for the beam, uninterested in spectacle. She invited Ryan back on the show for a segment about burnout and recovery. He told a story about losing his wife years earlier and the temptation to turn competence into grief's disguise. The body keeps receipts, he said on air. If you won't cry, it will find other ways to do it for you. In the booth, Emma nodded like a priest receiving a confession that already understood absolution. They did not rush the obvious. Love, when it is ready to be gentle, takes the scenic route. On a Sunday, they drove out past the city to a small antique market. Ryan bought a clock that did not tick for aesthetics, he said, and Emma bought a ceramic bowl the color of unpanicked water in the parking lot. Wind lifted the hair from her forehead, and Ryan, who had not yet asked for intimacy, asked a different kind. Would you like to try happy? He said. Happy is a strong word, she answered, but I would like to try unafraid. He reached for her hand. No ceremony, no claim, just the practical warmth of 2 lives that had decided not to audition anymore. They stood there long enough for the moment to become ordinary. That night, alone in her apartment, Emma wrote in her journal, "Redemption is not the opposite of betrayal. It's what you build when you stop making altars to the wound." She slept without dreams and woke without panic. 2 small sacraments a person should not have to earn. Ghosts do not rattle chains. They send texts. It began with a message from a number she did not recognize. "Can we talk?" There was no signature. She deleted it without the drama of a flinch. 2 days later, another, "I'm in Austin. Please." She did not reply. Boundaries. She'd learned. Wither if watered. The third came at dusk, while she and Ryan were stirring a pot of tomato soup that already tasted like winter. "Outside your building, 5 minutes." She stared at the screen long enough for the timer to beep and the soup to try to thicken into regret. "Lucas?" Ryan asked, reading the weather of her face. "Yes," she said. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, not as a test of loyalty, but as a man who had learned that courage includes exits. "Stay," she said, "but stay in the kitchen, on the sidewalk." The past looked thinner. Lucas stood by the curb in a jacket that borrowed confidence and shoes that had not slept. His eyes found hers and then kept looking, as if the person he remembered might arrive a moment later, trailing forgiveness behind her like a lost scarf. "Emma," he said, and the name sounded like something he had been practicing out loud in empty rooms. "What do you need?" she asked, the sentence polite enough to be mercy, firm enough to be fence. He swallowed, "To say I'm sorry in person." "You already did," she said, digitally and sufficiently. "I was a coward." He rushed on. "I used you to survive a life I didn't have the courage to admit I didn't want. I hurt you because I was trying not to be hurt by a world that has punished you long enough you thought you were allowed to outsource the sentence." She finished, not unkindly. "I know. It wasn't love with you," he said, and then winced at his own imprecision. "I mean it was love, but the wrong kind, the kind that needed you to disappear to feel safe." And with Daniel, she asked, "The right kind," he said, finally honest enough to wear it on his face. "But I ruined that too. He wouldn't be my secret anymore. He said I had to choose truth, publicly, or lose him privately. I lost him." The wind pushed a gum wrapper down the block with unnecessary drama. A car door slammed in the distance. Punctuation, where no sentence asked for it. "I'm not your priest," Emma said softly. "I can't absolve you, but I can recognize the accuracy. That's worth something." He swallowed again. The way men do when an emotion arrives they haven't budgeted for. "You're kinder than I deserve. Kindness is not leniency, she said. It's clarity that declines to humiliate. He nodded. There's one more thing. He seemed to sway, and she remembered he had once been the person she would reach for to prevent falling. She did not move. I know this is invasive, he said, but I also know facts matter. I'm sterile. Emma, I have been for years. I lied about getting tested because lies were easy and every truth felt like a cliff. If you ever believed you couldn't conceive because of you don't carry that isn't yours. Relief and anger rose at the same speed and collided in her throat, canceling each other like an equation. She closed her eyes, then opened them into a world that had not changed, but had adjusted its lighting. Thank you, she said. And the gratitude did not feel treasonous. It felt like a stone placed gently on a grave. He blinked hard. I hope you're happy. I hope you're brave. She answered, happy tends to follow the brave. From the foyer, Ryan appeared in the reflected glass, a quiet figure not demanding a role. Lucas saw him and nodded once, a soldier acknowledging the man who now guarded the door he had once failed to honor. Goodbye, Emma, Lucas said. Good luck, she replied. He left without theater. The street accepted him like a city accepts weather-aware, uninvested. Upstairs, Ryan set 2 bowls of soup on the table and passed her a spoon like a ritual object. They ate in silence until heat softened the parts of the body that try to armor the heart. I am not jealous, he said eventually. I am protective, mainly of your quiet. She reached for his wrist, the pulse steady beneath skin that had learned to stay. Thank you for leaving space for me to feel without asking me to perform. He smiled. We should write an instruction manual for being adult. She shook her head. No one would read it until too late. They laughed, and laughter rearranged the air back into a room. That night, on the radio, Emma chose letters from listeners who were not requesting advice, so much as witnesses. She ended the show with a line she had been waiting to earn. Closure does not mean the past stops happening, she said. It means you stop rehearsing the role you played in it. After midnight, she stood at the window and let the city's lights teach her patience. The basil plant on the sill was thriving. Somewhere in the apartment building, a child cried and then didn't. Somewhere in the block, a couple argued and then decided not to. Somewhere in her chest, a door clicked, not closed, aligned. Peace, like trust, is a structure. It cannot stand without small, load-bearing choices. The first test arrived, wearing pearls and certainty. Margaret Vance, Ryan's stepmother, invited Emma to lunch at a hotel that decorated its salads with opinions. The hostess led her to a corner table where Margaret had already arranged her napkin into a verdict. "Emma," Margaret said, making the lower case into a weapon. "So good you could come. Thank you for inviting me," Emma said, and meant it. She preferred opponents who announced their sport. "Ryan is impressionable," Margaret began, approving neither the adjective nor the me. "After what he's been through, the last thing he needs is another woman with complications." "Grief is not a complication," Emma said, smiling like a person who can afford dignity. "It's a curriculum." Margaret's mouth thinned. "I was very close to his late wife." "I know," Emma said. "You loved her. That doesn't require disliking me." "You're divorced," Margaret said, as if naming a contagion. "The circumstances." She lowered her voice for the deliciousness of it. "Were unusual." "True," Emma said. "I was a beard, then a bride, then a boundary. I prefer the last role." Margaret blinked. "Do you think sarcasm becomes you?" "I think accuracy does," Emma answered, "especially in rooms that prefer euphemism." The waiter arrived with water. They both thanked him like civilized islands. "You know how the town talks," Margaret said after he left. "It would be unfortunate for Ryan's reputation if this relationship became a spectacle. Spectacle requires audience." Emma said, "We're not selling tickets." Margaret leaned back. "He could have almost anyone." Emma considered the ceiling's unnecessary gilding. "He chose me. That may be a flaw in his judgment. It is not a flaw in my character." "You're clever," Margaret said. "Cleverness is often a cover." "And certainty is often a symptom," Emma said. "No heat in it, Mrs. Vance. I am not here to win you. I am here to love Ryan in a way that makes us both more ourselves. If that is unwelcome in your theology, then consider this lunch communion and count me blessedly excommunicated." Margaret stared, and in the stare, Emma saw the outline of a woman who had been promised a narrow version of safety and had paid with her tenderness. "He was happier," Margaret said softly. "When life was simple. No one is happy when their complexity has to disguise itself for your comfort," Emma said. "But I understand the grief of change. I do." They ate the rest of the meal with the truce of people who understood that war would accomplish nothing quantifiable. At the door, Margaret touched Emma's sleeve, a small, involuntary gesture. "If you hurt him," she said, "I will make it my hobby to ruin you." "If I hurt him," Emma said, "I will ruin myself. You won't get the job." They parted with the brusque affection of adversaries who respect each other's pull-ups. The second test arrived from inside the house, doubt. It came on a Tuesday when rain drew faint hieroglyphics on the window, and whisper lines had been heavy with callers who mistook endurance for destiny. Ryan was late. He texted board ran over. Be there in 20. 20 became 40. 40 became a door that opened on a man who smelled like other people's professional panic. I'm sorry, he said. The deal, I know, she said. I also know I'm not a calendar slot to be rescheduled without cost. He set down his briefcase like he was laying down a bruise. You're not. I'm here now. Now is not a refund, she said, then softened because his face confessed before his words could defend. Come sit. They did not resolve it with roses or scripts. They put words in a row, what she needed when work metastasized, what he needed when silence looked accusatory. They wrote it down like an agreement. They signed with intention, not ink. That weekend, he asked her to marry him without choreography. No ring, no kneeling, just a sentence that sounded like a pledge made between steady people. Let's not be lonely anymore. She could have said yes. She wanted to. But love, after injury, respects its own scar tissue. Ask me again, she said, after my no doesn't sound reflexive. He grinned. I like a project. Project or not, tenderness persisted. They visited a museum where a painting of a woman holding her own face together with two hands made them both stand still. On the placard, the title read, Self-Portrait After the Storm. That's you, Ryan said. And maybe me, us, Emma said, and smiled. The third test arrived with a lie she told to protect a truth she didn't trust yet, a late period. A test in the bathroom with the brutality of certainty. 2 lines that rearranged the furniture of her future. She sat on the floor and let the tile cool her back while her mind sprinted a marathon of catastrophes. When Ryan came by that evening with a movie and the kind of popcorn that stain fingers and absolve mornings, she hid the test in a drawer and hid her fear in competence. They watched 10 minutes. She didn't laugh at the part that begged for laughter. What's wrong? He asked. The question not a drill. She opened her mouth and found a lie waiting like an aggressive usher. Nothing, she said, just tired. He hit pause. The room held them like a cupped hand. I want to be wrong with you, he said. I also want to be useful. I can't be either if you narrate me out of the scene. She closed her eyes, then opened them into a man who had not earned suspicion. I'm late, she said, as in 2 lines. He inhaled as if someone had opened a window. Then he reached into the place where fear is usually stored and pulled out relief. Okay, he said, Okay, are you okay? I don't know how to not be bad at this, she said, at trusting good. We can be bad together, he said. Projects. Remember? She laughed into a tear she refused to dramatize. Ask me again, she said, but slower. He did not propose. He did something braver. He stayed. The night passed in a choreography of pragmatic tenderness, Googling doctors, ordering soup, wondering aloud about names and refusing to name the past. Before sleep, she said, I'm afraid the story wants a villain. We can be boring, he said. It's an underrated plot. They slept, not perfectly, but near enough for dreams to stop needing subtitles. A week later, the fourth test arrived the way shame prefers as rumor. Someone had sent Margaret a story that folded truth into malice. Emma as the reason Ryan's marriage had died years earlier. Emma as social climber. Emma as woman with a brand new ring she didn't have. None of it accurate. All of it sticky. Margaret called and said unwise things in a wise tone. Emma listened and learned nothing new about Margaret and something new about herself she could hang up without trembling. She texted Ryan the summary, not the drama, noise incoming. He replied, I shut the windows. She believed him because he had shown her how weatherproof he'd become. That night, she ended whisper lines with the sentence she wished someone had given her sooner. Love is not the opposite of fear, she said. Courage is choose who you marry accordingly. When the red light dimmed, her hand went to her stomach reflex, almost prayer. The body remembers to bless what the mind forgets to trust. As she walked out, rain had turned the street to film. Ryan waited under the awning with an umbrella and a look that made room. He didn't say anything useful like, we'll be fine. He said the true thing, we'll be together. She stepped under the umbrella, which is to say, she stepped into the weather's proof that shelter exists. The night made a sound like forgiveness when it hit the canvas above their heads. Austin breathed. The basil plant would be fuller tomorrow. On the 6th floor of a building across the way, someone opened a window and let the storm in on purpose. Emma smiled up at the sky that once terrified her with its largeness. She had learned to measure safety not by absence of pain, but by the presence of people who refused to call hiding a strategy. The test of love was not grand. It was small and daily and answered again and again by two humans deciding to be human at the same time. They walked toward home slowly, as if hurry were an insult to endings that had finally learned how to stay ended, and beginnings that were careful not to arrive as demands. The city, generous as ever, offered them its low, steady hum. Somewhere, a church marquee promised patience, Somewhere, a musician tuned a guitar for a song that would not apologize for its honesty. And here, beneath an ordinary umbrella, a woman whose voice had comforted strangers let herself be the one comforted, and a man who once mistook competence for love remembered how to hold a hand without needing to steer it. They turned the corner and vanished into the good work of being unafraid.
Time dish my sin Not every heartbreak announces itself with screaming. Some arrive disguised as calm.
For Emma, calm looked like morning light hitting the kitchen floor just right, the kettle whispering, and her own heartbeat finding a slower rhythm. For weeks, she had been counting small mercies, the baby growing steady, the basil plant still alive, the quiet still kind. But peace is never a permanent resident. It's a tenant with a short lease. One morning, Ryan's phone rang while he was showering. Emma didn't mean to look, but curiosity is the body's way of checking for danger. The caller ID read Margaret. Again, she silenced it. It buzzed again. This time, a message followed. She's destroying you. Everyone's talking. She put the phone down, steady but trembling inside. There was no jealousy, only exhaustion. How many wars must a woman refuse to fight before peace stops mistaking her for surrender? When Ryan came out, hair damp, towel around his neck, she asked the question quietly, "Do I need to defend you to your family, or are you going to defend me yourself?" He looked caught, not guilty, just startled, like a man reminded that protection isn't automatic. "I told her to stop," he said. "She's afraid I'll get hurt." "She's right," Emma said softly, "but not for the reasons she thinks." That night, Whisper Lines aired an episode about the noise between us. Emma read a letter from a listener whose in-laws treated her kindness as manipulation. Her reply wasn't directed at the letter at all. It was a message to herself. Some people mistake your peace for weakness because they've only ever known control disguised as care. Don't explain your silence. Protect it. Listeners flooded the inbox that night. One message read simply, "Thank you for making quiet sound strong." The breaking point came a week later in the form of an email. As all modern tragedies do, a gossip blog that thrived on tragedy disguised as entertainment, published a headline: Radio host's secret scandal, the affair that ended a marriage returns. There it was, her face, her voice, her private ruin recycled into clickbait. Margaret's fingerprints weren't visible, but her perfume lingered between the lines. The article twisted timelines, suggested Emma had broken 2 marriages, painted Ryan as her next victim. Her inbox exploded with strangers' advice. Repent, resign, explain, vanish. When Ryan saw it, he looked like someone had spilled ink over the blueprint of his life. "I'll fix it," he said. "I'll call the paper. I'll sue. She shook her head. "You can't sue noise. You just have to stop echoing it." He reached for her. She didn't move away, but she didn't melt either. "Do you regret this?" he asked. "I regret that truth is always late to its own defense," she said. For 2 days, she didn't go on air. The station understood. Maya brought soup, said nothing. The listeners noticed. The silence became a headline of its own. On the 3rd day, Emma returned. The producer asked if she wanted to skip the segment on resilience. She said, "No, tonight. We talk about it." She began with a confession that wasn't labeled as one. "Sometimes the world will write your story before you're ready to tell it. They'll get the punctuation wrong. They'll call pain a plot twist and healing a cover-up. But here's the thing, you don't owe anyone the director's cut of your suffering." The soundboard lit up like a choir. People were listening, not for scandal, but for steadiness. That night, Ryan sat in the dark, listening to her voice fill a city that had judged her and still wanted her to speak. When she came home, he didn't say anything. He simply placed her headphones back on the counter, repaired, polished, ready. Sometimes love doesn't apologize. It shows up and cleans the tools. It happened 2 weeks later, the moment life folded back toward forgiveness. Emma was 6 months along, the kind of tired that feels ancient. Ryan had gone to a leadership conference. She was alone in the apartment when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, a familiar face. Lucas. She almost didn't open, but compassion, like gravity, pulls in one direction. He looked thinner, sober, gentler. His eyes carried the humility of a man who had finally met his own shadow and chosen not to argue. "I saw the article," he said. "I came to tell you, I'm sorry they're using your name to hurt you again. I've survived worse sentences," she said. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he continued. "Only to thank you. You were the first person who saw me before I even knew who I was. Daniel and I, We're back in touch. We're trying again. Her lips parted in genuine surprise. That's good, Lucas. That's very good. He nodded, a tear he didn't chase. You once said forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without rebleeding. I didn't understand then. I do now. She smiled softly. Then it was worth saying. Before leaving, he handed her an envelope. It's nothing big, just something I wrote when I didn't have the courage to talk. She waited until he was gone to open it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, shaky, sincere. You were my shield when I was pretending to be brave. You took a bullet meant for my cowardice. I hope life gives you someone who doesn't need saving, someone who already knows how to stay. Tears came, not dramatic, gentle, grateful. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a verdict. It was housekeeping. You clear the room so love can have space to sit again. That evening, Ryan called. Flights delayed, he said. Might not make it home till morning. No problem, she said. The baby and I have company, a basil plant and perspective. He laughed. You and that plant are going to outgrow me. Only if you stop watering, she said, smiling. After hanging up, she turned on the radio, her own station, but someone else's show. A young host was reading messages from listeners who had been inspired by Emma Brooks's resilience. One caller said, "Her stories made me realize love doesn't fix you, it invites you to rebuild." Emma sat on the couch, one hand on her stomach, the other tracing invisible circles on the armrest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a narrator describing her pain. She felt like a woman living her piece. The next morning, Ryan came home early, flowers, pastries, and a nervous smile. "We need to talk," he said. She froze because that sentence, in her life, had never delivered good news. But this time, it did. "I got a call from the network," he said. "They want me to lead the new community outreach program. It's based in Chicago. They want you too. Whisper lines syndicated nationally. It's everything we said we wanted." Her smile was slow, real. "And what's the catch moving?" he said. "Together." She looked around the apartment, the basil, the city skyline that had watched her fall and rise. "When 3 months, he said, after the baby." She nodded, hand still on her stomach. "Okay, okay, okay." He exhaled, and in that breath was the relief of a man who had waited years for a simple word to mean forever. They hugged, long and quiet, the kind of silence that feels like an answer instead of an absence. That night, Emma wrote in her journal, Grace is when the world lets you start over without demanding that you pretend the first draft never happened. Chicago came with wider skies, colder winds, and the smell of a life freshly painted. Their new apartment had a window facing the lake, a restless mirror that looked different each morning. The baby Noah arrived in late spring, small and loud and alive, a heartbeat that reset everything. Emma took a year off the radio, but her stories found her anyway. The network turned her essays into a podcast called Letters After Midnight. Listeners wrote from every time zone. Her words had become a compass for strangers learning to live again. Ryan built his program with quiet pride, connecting veterans to mental health resources. He said, "Maybe helping others stay is my apology for the times I left too soon." One evening, they took Noah for a walk along the lake. The city hummed. The wind had teeth, but also mercy. Emma stopped by the railing, holding the baby close. "Look," she whispered to him. "That's what peace looks like. It moves, but it doesn't leave." Ryan wrapped an arm around her. "You know what's funny? What you never sound like a host when you talk to him. You sound like a prayer." She smiled. Maybe they're the same thing. Years later, Whisper Lines aired its final live episode. Emma's voice, softer now but deeper, filled the studio. Scars don't vanish. They become punctuation marks, proof that the story didn't end where it could have. A scar doesn't say, "I'm broken." It says, "I healed where it hurt." The room was quiet, reverent. Maya wiped a tear. Ryan, watching from the booth, mouthed the words he'd been holding for years. "I'm proud of you." After the show, Emma walked alone to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below, not flawless, but forgiving. She held her wrist up to the moonlight. The scar was faint now, barely visible, but when she traced it, she felt every version of herself who had survived to see this night. She whispered, not to the sky, but to the memory of pain that had once demanded her attention. "You can rest now. I'm not afraid anymore." Ryan appeared behind her, wrapping her in a coat, talking to the ghosts again, just saying goodbye. "Do they answer?" She smiled. "Only when I'm ready to listen." They stood there, mother, father, child, framed by the hum of a city that had learned their story and forgiven its own. The moon hung patient. The wind carried no threat. The scar, small and pale, gleamed once, then disappeared into skin that had outgrown its wound. Some scars fade, others stay not to haunt us, but to remind us how far we've come. If this story found you tonight, breathe, let it stay a while. Subscribe to Calm Mind Journal, where we share stories of loss, courage, and the quiet redemption of being human.